Beverly Harrington believed in order. Not just any order, her order. As the president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association for the past 8 years, she had transformed the previously average suburban neighborhood into what she considered a model community. Property values had risen 15% during her tenure, a statistic she mentioned at every monthly meeting with the precision of someone reciting their social security number. On this particular Tuesday morning in May, Beverly stood at her bay window, arms crossed over her crisp white blouse, eyes narrowed behind designer glasses that cost more than most residents' monthly HOA fees. Her perfectly maintained front lawn glistened with morning dew, each blade of grass seemingly aligned by ruler. But it wasn't her own immaculate property that held her attention. "Charles," she called, not taking her eyes off the scene across the street. "Charles, come look at this immediately." Her husband shuffled into the living room, coffee mug in hand, his newspaper tucked under one arm. 25 years of marriage had taught him to recognize the particular pitch of outrage in his wife's voice. This was at least an 8 on the Beverly Harrington scale of neighborhood infractions. "What is it now, Bev?" he asked, not bothering to mask his exhaustion. "The Millers are having their driveway redone," she said, the words coming out as if she were describing a violent crime in progress. Without approval forms. Across the street, a construction crew had already begun breaking up the Millers' old concrete driveway. The foreman was walking the property with Tim Miller, pointing and gesturing as they discussed the project. A bright yellow excavator sat idle nearby, its bucket poised like a predator waiting to strike. "Maybe they got approval and you just don't remember," Charles suggested, retreating toward his den. "Wouldn't be the first time the committee approved something when you were on your cruise last month." Beverly's head snapped around. "I review every approval, even when I'm away. This is unauthorized construction, and you know as well as I do what Section 8, Paragraph C of the bylaws says about unauthorized modifications to street-facing structural elements." Charles didn't know, nor did he care to. He simply nodded and disappeared into his den, closing the door firmly behind him. Beverly grabbed her HOA binder, a 3-inch thick document containing every rule, regulation, and violation notice she had ever issued, and marched across the street with the determined gait of a soldier entering battle. "Timothy Miller," she called out, her voice carrying across 3 perfectly manicured lawns. "I need to speak with you immediately about this construction project." Tim Miller's shoulders visibly tensed. At 42, he was relatively new to Sunny Meadows, having moved in just 18 months ago with his wife and 2 children. He had already received 7 violation notices from Beverly, 1 for garbage cans left out past 6 p.m., 2 for holiday decorations that exceeded the permitted time frame, 3 for grass that exceeded the regulation height of 2.5 inches, and 1 particularly heated exchange about the color of his mailbox, which Beverly insisted was naval blue when the approved color was clearly midnight navy. "Morning, Beverly," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "What can I help you with?" The foreman, sensing tension, suddenly found something fascinating to examine on his clipboard. "You can help me by showing me the approved documentation for this project," Beverly said, flipping open her binder to a blank violation form, pen already poised to document the transgression. "Documentation?" Tim's smile faltered. "It's just a driveway replacement. Same footprint, just updating the cracked concrete." Beverly's pen scratched furiously across the paper. Section 8, Paragraph C clearly states that any modification, repair, or alteration to street-facing structural elements, including but not limited to driveways, walkways, and retaining walls, requires prior written approval from the Architectural Control Committee. What neither Beverly nor Tim realized was that beneath the crumbling concrete of the old driveway lay something far more significant than an HOA violation, a poorly marked natural gas line that was about to turn their neighborhood dispute into something much more explosive. "I don't need approval for a simple repair," Tim insisted, his voice rising slightly as he felt his Tuesday morning slipping away from him. "It's not a modification, it's maintenance." Beverly's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "That distinction is for the committee to decide, not you. And this," she gestured toward the excavator with her pen as if it were a weapon, "hardly qualifies as simple repair." The construction foreman, Marco Rodriguez, had been in business for 20 years and had encountered plenty of neighborhood tyrants. He stepped forward, hard hat in hand, his weathered face projecting calm professionalism. "Ma'am, we have all the proper city permits," he said, retrieving a folded document from his back pocket. "Everything's by the book." Beverly barely glanced at the permit. "City approval is irrelevant. This is Sunny Meadows property governed by our covenant. Construction must cease immediately until proper HOA documentation is filed and approved." By now, several neighbors had emerged onto their porches or paused while retrieving their mail, drawn by the spectacle unfolding on the Miller's driveway. Beverly was aware of the audience and stood straighter, projecting her authority. You have exactly 1 hour to remove this equipment from the property, she continued, or I'll be forced to issue a formal violation with daily fines of $250 as outlined in our bylaws. Tim's face flushed crimson. He'd endured Beverly's petty tyranny for 18 months, each interaction leaving him feeling like he'd moved his family into an open-air prison rather than a suburban paradise. The driveway had been his breaking point, cracked and sunken. It had become a hazard for his children and an eyesore he was tired of apologizing for. Beverly, he said, struggling to keep his voice even, the driveway is getting fixed today. I've taken the day off work. I paid the deposit. The crew is here. This is happening. A collective gasp came from the small crowd of neighbors who had never witnessed such direct defiance of Beverly's authority. Several pulled out their phones, sensing that this confrontation might be worth documenting. Then you leave me no choice, Beverly said, scribbling furiously on her violation form. This will go to the full board and we'll pursue all available penalties, including liens if necessary. She tore off the yellow copy of the violation form and thrust it toward Tim, who made no move to take it. After an awkward moment, she slapped it against his chest where it fluttered to the ground between them. 1 hour, she repeated, turning on her heel and marching back toward her house, already dialing her phone. Yes, Judith, she said into the receiver, loud enough for everyone to hear. Emergency board meeting. My house. 30 minutes. Tim watched her go, then turned to Marco with an apologetic shrug. I'm sorry about that. Please continue. Marco looked uncertain. You sure, boss? HOAs can be nasty business. I've seen them cause real headaches. I'm sure, Tim said firmly. Let's get this done. Within 20 minutes, the old concrete had been fully broken up, revealing the soil beneath. The excavator operator, following the marked utilities, began carefully digging to create a proper base for the new driveway. As he worked, he noticed something odd. A faded yellow marking that didn't match any of the utility maps they'd been provided. Hey, Marco, he called out. Better take a look at this. Marco approached the excavation site, frowning at the faint yellow line that had been concealed beneath the old driveway. He pulled out his phone to call the utility locating service when a commotion across the street caught his attention. Beverly had assembled a quorum of the HOA board, 4 middle-aged women and 1 retired man, all carrying identical binders and expressions of stern disapproval. They marched in formation across the street, with Beverly in the lead like a general approaching enemy lines. Timothy Miller, she called out. This is your final warning before we initiate emergency injunctive relief. Tim, who had been reviewing the concrete delivery schedule with another worker, looked up with exasperation. For God's sake, Beverly, it's a driveway. It's about rules and proper procedures, she countered, her voice rising. Without them, we descend into chaos. As if the universe itself had a sense of irony at that precise moment, the excavator's bucket caught the edge of the unmarked gas line. A sharp hissing sound filled the air, causing Marco to shout, Everyone back. Gas line. But Beverly, caught in the momentum of her righteous indignation, was not one to retreat. She stepped forward instead, pointing accusingly at the hissing pipe. This is exactly why we have approval processes. This is precisely the kind of reckless. The explosion wasn't as dramatic as a Hollywood film might portray. There was no massive fireball reaching toward the heavens, but it was more than enough to transform Sunny Meadows' most pristine street into a scene of utter chaos. A loud whump, followed by a bright flash, sent everyone scrambling. The gas ignition created a concentrated blast that launched dirt, chunks of concrete, and Marco's clipboard 20 feet into the air. Beverly Harrington, caught mid-lecture, was thrown backward onto Judith Simmons' prized hydrangeas. The HOA board members scattered like bowling pins, their precious binders of regulations flying open, pages fluttering across the manicured lawns like bureaucratic confetti. For 3 long seconds, absolute silence descended on Sunny Meadows. Then, pandemonium. Call 911. Tim shouted, scrambling to his feet and rushing toward the construction workers who had been closest to the explosion. The excavator operator, Miguel, had been thrown clear but was dazed, his hard hat missing and a cut above his eyebrow leaking blood. Marco was already on his phone, backing everyone away from the site where flames now danced along the ruptured gas line, feeding on the steady supply of fuel from below. Is everyone okay? Tim called out, helping Miguel to his feet. Across the street, Charles Harrington emerged from his den at the sound of the explosion. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of concern and, though he would never admit it, a small spark of satisfaction at seeing his wife's perfect world temporarily disrupted. He jogged across the street to where Beverly was being helped up by Judith, her designer outfit now streaked with dirt and her hair askew. Beverly, are you hurt? He asked, brushing leaves from her shoulders. They did this on purpose, Beverly sputtered, her eyes wild. This is domestic terrorism. Charles exchanged a look with Judith, whose expression clearly communicated that she was reconsidering her allegiance to Beverly's crusade. "I think it was an accident, dear," Charles said gently. "Let's get you home and cleaned up." "Accident?" Beverly shrieked, shaking off his hand. "There are no accidents in Sunny Meadows, only violations." By now, the street had erupted into activity. Neighbors who had been discreetly watching from windows and porches flooded outside. Some brought fire extinguishers, though they kept a safe distance from the flames. Others helped the day's HOA board members collect their scattered papers. A few even produced first aid kits and began tending to minor cuts and scrapes. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency services responded to multiple 911 calls. The neighborhood teenagers, typically too cool to acknowledge adults, were documenting everything on their phones, providing live commentary for their social media followers. "This is Jaden coming to you live from what used to be the most boring street in America," one boy narrated dramatically. "Karen from the HOA just got yeeted into next Tuesday by a gas explosion. This is literally the most exciting thing to happen here since Mr. Peterson's 2P blew into the Williams pool filter last summer." Meanwhile, Tim Miller had shifted into crisis management mode. He directed several neighbors to back their cars out of driveways, creating clear access for emergency vehicles. He helped an elderly couple from 2 doors down move to a safer distance. All the while, he kept a wary eye on the growing flames at the end of his driveway, which had begun to spread to the decorative grasses Beverly had insisted everyone plant along their property lines. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very uniformity Beverly had enforced was now creating a perfect path for the fire to travel from yard to yard. The first to arrive was a police cruiser, followed closely by a fire truck that screeched to a halt at the entrance to Sunny Meadows. The volunteer fire department, 3 of whom were Sunny Meadows residents who had received violation notices from Beverly for improper garbage can storage, leaped into action with practiced efficiency. "Everyone back," shouted Fire Chief Williams, who had once engaged in a 3-month battle with Beverly over the height of his fence. Gas line fires are dangerous and unpredictable. As the firefighters deployed, a utility company truck arrived to shut off the gas supply to the neighborhood. 2 paramedics began checking residents for injuries, starting with those closest to the blast. Beverly, having refused Charles' attempts to lead her home, stood in the middle of the chaos, clutching her violated violation forms to her chest. Her perfectly ordered world was crumbling before her eyes. The flames had now reached her own meticulously maintained lawns, singing the edges of the hedges she trimmed weekly with manual scissors for perfect uniformity. Beverly Harrington ran like she'd never run before. Her sensible 2-inch heels, selected specifically to conform to the HOA dress code she'd personally written, slowed her down only momentarily before she kicked them off, leaving them like casualties of war on Mrs. Gonzalez's perfectly trimmed lawn. In her 25 years as a Sunny Meadows resident and 8 years as HOA president, Beverly had never once broken the no bare feet in common areas rule. Today was full of firsts. She cut through the Petersons' side yard, violating bylaw 17.3 regarding unauthorized traversal of private property, vaulted over the Richardsons' decorative rock border, contravening exterior decoration guidelines, Section 4, and disappeared into the community park that backed up to several Sunny Meadows properties. Back at the scene of the explosion, emergency responders had contained the fire to 3 front yards and utility workers had successfully shut off the gas main. The immediate danger had passed, leaving in its wake a surreal landscape of scorched grass, scattered paperwork, and stunned residents. The local news reporter, Cassandra West, was interviewing anyone willing to speak on camera, which turned out to be nearly everyone. Years of pent-up frustrations with Beverly's reign of regulatory terror had created a dam of resentment that, once breached, flooded forth in a torrent of anecdotes. "She fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd, said Frank Wilson, whose handlebar mustache had been the subject of at least 3 HOA emergency meetings. "My daughter's lemonade stand was shut down after 7 minutes, added Sarah Thompson. Beverly said it violated zoning ordinances and produced excessive sidewalk foot traffic. "She measured the height of my grass with a ruler," said Eduardo Gonzalez, still in his hospital scrubs after a night shift, "while I was sleeping." Charles Harrington watched these interviews from the periphery, feeling an odd mixture of embarrassment and relief. For years, he had tried to temper Beverly's more extreme tendencies, suggesting that perhaps not every infraction required the full weight of HOA enforcement. His suggestions had been dismissed as enabling community degradation. Tim Miller, meanwhile, had emerged as an unlikely leader during the crisis. He coordinated with emergency services, organized a head count to ensure all residents were accounted for, and even set up a refreshment station using camping equipment from his garage. "Mr. Miller," Cassandra said, approaching with her microphone extended, "you seem to have taken charge here. Would you say this incident represents a failure of HOA leadership?" Tim hesitated, wiping sweat from his brow. I wouldn't put it that way. This was an accident, albeit one that might have been avoided with better communication. Right now, I'm just focused on making sure everyone's safe. Sources tell us this all started because of a dispute over driveway repairs, Cassandra pressed, gesturing toward the crater that had once been Tim's front yard. Maybe we could all benefit from reassessing how we handle neighborhood decisions, Tim said diplomatically. Communities work best when they're collaborative, not combative. Several residents nodded in agreement, including all 5 members of the HOA board who had followed Beverly into battle less than an hour ago. Judith Simmons, the board's treasurer, stepped forward. I think I speak for the board when I say we may have lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to be, neighbors helping neighbors maintain a pleasant community, not a punitive regime. Charles approached the group looking somewhat lost without Beverly beside him. Has anyone seen my wife? He asked, concern evident in his voice despite everything. She took off that way, said Jaden, the teenage documentarian, pointing toward the park. It's all on my TikTok. Already got like 2,000 views. Charles sighed. I should probably find her. I'll come with you, Tim offered unexpectedly. 2 sets of eyes are better than one. As they set off in the direction Beverly had fled, the fire chief approached Judith and the remaining board members. Once we've got everything secure here, we'll need to inspect all the gas lines in the neighborhood, he explained. According to the utility company, the line that was struck wasn't properly marked because it was installed before current regulations required documentation. There could be others. Judith looked horrified. You mean we'll need to dig up yards? Disrupt landscaping? Safety first, the chief replied firmly. Unless you prefer more explosions. Of course not, Judith said quickly. It's just that Beverly has always been so insistent about maintaining aesthetic uniformity. 3 months after what locals now referred to as the Great Driveway Disaster, Sunny Meadows was a neighborhood transformed. Not just physically, though the scorched lawns and damaged properties had been repaired, but in spirit. The remnants of Tim Miller's ill-fated driveway project had been cleared away, replaced by a new concrete expanse that featured an unusual design element. A mosaic tile inlay depicting a phoenix rising from flames. The HOA had not only approved the design but had subsidized it as part of the neighborhood's rebirth initiative. On this particular Saturday morning, Sunny Meadows was hosting its first ever block party. Folding tables lined the street, laden with potluck dishes that reflected the community's diverse culinary backgrounds. From Walter Chen's dim sum to Eduardo Gonzalez's empanadas to Sarah Thompson's legendary 7-layer dip. Children darted between yards, playing an elaborate game of tag, crossing property lines with impunity. Dogs of various breeds and sizes, some significantly exceeding the former weight restrictions, lounged in the shade or begged for scraps. At the center of it all stood a long table where Tim Miller and the newly elected HOA board were handing out copies of the revised covenant, a slender document that had been reduced from its original 147 pages to a reasonable 12. Remember, these are guidelines, not commandments, Tim was explaining to a new family that had just moved in at the end of the street. The goal is to maintain a pleasant community where everyone feels respected and included. Across the way, Charles Harrington was manning the grill, flipping burgers and laughing with neighbors he'd barely spoken to during Beverly's reign. He seemed years younger, his shoulders no longer hunched with the tension of living with Sunny Meadows' most feared enforcer. Has anyone seen Beverly? Judith asked, approaching with a plate of watermelon slices. She said she'd be here. Charles checked his watch. She's probably still at her session. You know how she loses track of time when she's with Dr. Punnell. Beverly had been seeing a therapist 3 times a week since the incident, not entirely by choice, but as part of the compromise that had kept her from facing legal consequences for her role in the accident. The gas company had been found primarily responsible due to the improperly marked line, but Beverly's interference had contributed to the chaos. I heard she's actually making progress, Walter commented, joining the conversation. My wife saw her at the grocery store yesterday, and she didn't say a word about the Pattersons' new fence, even though it's definitely made of the wrong material. Small victories, Charles said with a smile. As if summoned by their conversation, Beverly appeared at the edge of the gathering. She looked different, her hair more relaxed, her clothing casual rather than starched and pressed. She stood for a moment, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. Tim spotted her and waved her over. After a moment's hesitation, she crossed the street to join him. Beverly, he greeted her warmly. Glad you could make it. We were just reviewing the new guidelines. She glanced at the slim document in his hand. Only 12 pages. What happened to sections 20 through 47? There was a beat of awkward silence before Tim realized she was making a joke. Perhaps the first joke anyone in Sunny Meadows had ever heard from Beverly Harrington. Composted, he replied with a grin. They're helping Judith's hydrangeas recover. Beverly actually laughed. It sounds so unexpected that several nearby conversations paused momentarily. I brought something, she said, producing a neatly folded piece of paper from her pocket. It's my last official act as former HOA president. Tim unfolded it carefully, half expecting a legal notice or formal complaint. Instead, he found this simple drawing in the community park, with notes about installing benches and planting native wildflowers. I thought perhaps a memorial garden, Beverly explained, suddenly self-conscious. Not for anyone who died, obviously, but for the old Sunny Meadows, and a welcome to the new one. Tim studied the drawing. The design was beautiful, inviting, and nothing like the rigid, manicured spaces Beverly had previously championed. This is really good, Beverly. I didn't know you had an artistic side. She shrugged. Neither did I. Dr. Patel suggested I try activities with no rules. It's been educational. From across the street came the sound of breaking glass as a child's errant ball shattered a window. Beverly flinched instinctively, her hand reaching for a violation form that was no longer there. She took a deep breath. That would have been a $200 fine in the old days, she observed. And now? Tim asked, watching her carefully.